Hello, and welcome to the Warp Shelf. I'm Frank Duran.
I'm Deshaun Vasquez.
And today, two artists reach into the pile of movies.
It could be comics, it could be TV shows, it could be video games, just any sort of art form that moves you. And we decide through the pile what's worth taking with you. Now, that can be physically or that can be spiritually.
Yeah, and we're deciding today if The Incredibles on its 20th anniversary belongs on your shelf. I can't believe it's been 20 years. Like, I literally can't, because the sequel only came out in 2018, so it's like one of those things where you're telling me The Incredibles is that old at this point? And you're like, yeah, 2004, baby. And it's a little hurtful to my old age.
I still kind of felt that when the second film had come out, just because I saw so many memes about just like, no kids allowed at Incredibles 2. We're keeping the fuck out of this movie. Get these kids out of here. They're not the ones who've been waiting.
And I feel a little bit like Incredibles is one of those movies that is riding the line often if it is like a young kid movie at all. Like, it has a lot of things that young kids could like, but there's a lot of adult themes going on all over the place, and especially so in the sequel. But like,
that's definitely one of the many reasons it struck a chord with me, because I was a kid who did not like to be talked down to in my entertainment. So anytime something was at least slightly adult, or which is more a translation to just like not talking down to its primary demographic, I always appreciated that. I didn't need to be pandered to.
Which I feel like is a big thing in kids' content. I feel like a lot of people will be like, oh, that's a kid's show, because they know how it's talking down to people. And I feel like Pixar often, or used to not, talk down to their audience, and I feel like it's one of those things that might be just Brad Bird doing his first movie at Pixar, because this Incredibles is written and directed by Brad Bird, and if you didn't know, he was asked many times to join Pixar. John Lasseter, how do you say it, Deshaun?
Yeah, Lasseter.
Lasseter is asked him many times, and then it took Warner Brothers like not promoting Iron Giant. For him to be like, well, screw you guys, I made a masterpiece and you guys don't care, and still to this day, Iron Giant is quite hampered by its lack of advertising and its lack of just sharedness.
Time has like come around on it in terms of like iconography. Absolutely. Like the Alamo Drafthouse in Boston, when you walk into the entrance, there's a giant fucking Iron Giant statue in the lobby. So, like, time has come around on it, and it went from, like, cult to, like, iconic status, but definitely underappreciated in its day. And another movie that doesn't talk down to kids.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was him coming into Pixar and being like, this movie is a direct response to him being like, okay, I get to make whatever movie I want because they've been asking me forever, and I'm making my superhero family movie. And yes, in the first 5 minutes, there's the cops and robbers shooting guns at each other, which I don't know if that's happened back in the...
Well, it's not even like... Well, before that, we actually don't open on like the spectacle. We open with the interviews. Which I think is a great...
I was going to get into that, but I just wanted to be like, this already, they're like, here, literally the shot comes up, they're holding the gun, they cock it, and then they start firing, and that's the shot. And you're like, oh, they're being like, hey, this isn't your normal Disney fare. This is not your normal, like, this isn't Toy Story, and I'm not saying this is hardcore or something, but even Batman the Animated Series was like, guns, we can't freaking show guns.
There was plenty of guns in Batman the Animated Series. You haven't watched it in a little bit. But like,
no, but after... they fought for it. They fought for that. That's what I mean by
but
that.
Like, post DCAU, you ain't never gonna see realistic looking guns again. By the time you got to something like Beware the Batman, they all look like toys. It's just like, oh, they're yellow and they shoot they're like shock pistols or something.
But yes, I do agree. The opening in The Incredibles is genius, because it starts off with this secret identity documentary that that was obviously even old at the time of like that's supposed to take place in the story, and it's just it's a great way to introduce not only the characters, the universe, but just like the attitude of the whole thing, and
And
it's all just introduced there.
And it's also like emphasizing personality and characterization first above the spectacle. Spectacle
Yes.
informs like personality and characterization. And I also love the touch that all three of the characters they interview, because it's specifically Bob, Helen, and Frozone, and the three of them, where they are in their lives at that point, they end up on the exact opposite end of the spectrum in modern day, because Bob wants to settle down, and in present day he hates that he's settled down. Helen doesn't want to settle down. She's the one who's most acclimated to settling down. And then Frozone is just kind of like a casual, like, ladies man who doesn't want to be tied down. And then you get to modern day and he's married.
He's a married man with honey.
Yeah.
I think it's quite, I think that is a genius way to introduce. It's so simple, and you're able to feel that change to the modern day, which, by the way, I keep doing that quotes because technically the secret identity and the marriage happens in 1952, and the whole of Incredibles and Incredibles 2 happens in 1962. So it's not exactly like, these are period pieces, which I enjoy thoroughly, you know, like
a period piece, but also timeless, because it does have like that retro futuristic vibe to it too.
Which I think is so great about this movie too, is that like some of the future tech in this movie we just have now, you know, like, and that's not even that far. Like, I know they were trying to show that, like, oh yes, like look at this future tech, but like,
yeah, like when he,
at the same time, like, we have tablets now, we have
I was thinking that too, the tablet out of the manila envelope, and the fact that it has like, oh, the facial recognition to detect them. I'm like, oh shit, we have both of those things now.
Right? There's a bunch of things in this movie where you're like, we have that now, you know, like, and I don't think that they were trying to like super send it to the future, you know, like with those devices, but still kind of interesting that like all the tech here is real, you know, like nowadays, and we're actually having use of it. And I'm like,
Brad Bird definitely has he definitely really likes that like 50s 60s like retro futuristic mix of what do they call it? I forget, because it's not steampunk, it's like a slightly different I think Atom Punk is a name for it.
Yes,
like
Atom
one
Punk,
of the names.
Yes.
Yeah,
ATOM,
because it's present here. It's also present in Tomorrowland, and it's also there's a little bit in the Iron Giant.
Tomorrowland? You actually watched Tomorrowland?
It wasn't great.
See,
but it's worth bringing up in terms of like aesthetic that he likes.
Yeah, I like Brad Bird, but I was like, that looks not good. You know, like, I was like,
yeah, but it is one of those things where it's just like, if it's bad, and it was, I don't blame him for it.
Yeah.
It's just Disney attempting to they're just so desperate to get that Pirates money. It's just like, we keep adapting our rides into movies. One of them's gonna hit like Pirates did. We swear.
One of them's gonna work. Even the Jungle Ride,
Cruise.
What was it called? Jungle Cruise. It's fun, and they made a ton of money off that, but that was not the bang busters that like Pirates is, and still is going to be, because they're making more Pirates movies, you know, like, and you're like, okay.
Point is, like, he really likes that sort of like retro futuristic aesthetic, because it's here, it's in The Incredibles. There's a little bit of it in Iron Giant, because that's also a period piece, and you can really see it in the design of the robot. And I guess his next film is also going to lean into that pretty heavily too. He's like working on it now. It's called Ray Gun, as in like two separate names, Ray Gunn, and I guess that's also going to be like retro futuristic.
I mean, I like it, you know, like, I'm a sucker for it. I mean, we already brought up Batman the Animated Series, and that is my childhood, and they had such a you know, like a retro futuristic,
like Art Deco
thing.
Like sort of like period but timeless at the same time.
Yeah,
like futuristic technology, but also like sepia tone TVs.
Yeah, right.
But it works because that kind of echoes like what superheroes were in their inception. Like, this is pulp.
Yes.
And what I love about this movie is that it's not just one genre. It's
I think that's the important difference between, and I'm only going to bring up Incredibles 2 to compare how good Incredibles 1 is. Like, guys, we're not talking about Incredibles 2 today, but it is going to be brought up to be like, see what you missed? See what you fucking didn't see? You know, like, because the number one thing that's missing from Incredibles 2, other than the messy script and just the all over just at the wall that it is the literal the Incredibles is a spy film with superheroes in it. And that is how it was pitched. That's how it was inceptionized. Like that's how they did it from the beginning, and it shows. Just that smooth, like James Bond, Sean Connery, 60s, 70s,
with
feel.
One of Michael Giacchino's best scores, because
oh yeah,
I will never hold back in saying that like Michael Giacchino's a very talented composer, but he has a lot of generic scores. You could tell like which one's
if you
really
look at his list. It's
which
pretty
one's like
fantastic.
Yeah,
but,
and he'll have stuff like the Abrams Star Trek movies, which are really good scores, but then he'll have stuff like the MCU Spider-Man movie scores are kind of nothing. His score for Rogue One is kind of nothing. You gotta give him credit,
though, if he did come up with... He kind of did that Spider-Man theme, and that has stuck, Like, it's like the man's good at themes,
Well,
like,
yeah, because it's an orchestral version of the old cartoon theme.
Yeah.
That would have happened with or without him.
That's true. But you gotta give credit. Like, even on IMDb, the top 3 are Star Trek, The Batman, and the 2 last Planet of the Apes movies, which are... like some of the greatest soundtracks of all time, like no question. Like I'll take him just, getting that paycheck on an MCU movie when he's doing stuff like the Batman, like you're like, holy shit.
And
like,
that was my thing coming out of the Batman. Just like, wow, this is his best score in a bit.
Yeah. And I do think that The Incredibles, it's extremely like the spy theming. It had to have a great soundtrack, like it had to, and he nails that feel with introducing still like nice themes for each character, and just the way it flows is absolutely incredible.
And it harkens back to like old school comic book characters where a lot of the time they were kind of this blend of like, super heroics, but also a lot of like espionage stuff. You think of like the Shadow, the Spirit, or depending on the era, even Batman. Like that's the way Grant Morrison tackles Batman.
Even Nick Fury, if we're talking about like straight up spy things, that was a very popular comic. Just Nick Fury doing spy shit.
It's like that specific flavor of pulp, which like now that the superhero genre, especially on the live action side, has gone on for so long, that sense of pulp has like become a lot more homogenized when it wasn't yet. Because this was even a decade before like Winter Soldier came out.
Right. Yeah, no, this is that's what I think is important when you're watching The Incredibles, is that this was at the beginning of this superhero craze, and that's why I think is another problem with Incredibles 2 is it's a response to the modern superhero craze, and by that I mean it loses all of its uniqueness and flavor that it has in The Incredibles 1, it's just
mostly because it's like a shallow examination of it.
Yes.
But we'll talk until we're blue in the face about the missed potential of Incredibles 2. So let's not harp on it too much.
But I do think it's quite interesting because, like, guys, let's get into like why we're doing an episode on this, because this isn't part of our AFI Top 100, which it could be. I feel like they don't add many animated movies to that list, but I think
is The Incredibles on the AFI list?
It's not. I scrolled through it to make sure because I was like, can we just slap a number on this and be like, we're skipping around, but no, they have like Snow White and that's it,
for the historical.
And you're just like, okay, all right, but I do think that this is one of Pixar's best. And I do think that there's a lot to be examined here.
It was always one of those things where, like, I would always say The Incredibles is my favorite Pixar film, and I would have to clarify, no, it's not just because I'm a sucker for cape shit.
Yeah, right? You're just like, sure, that does make me laugh, like, out loud.
It doesn't hurt, but I don't love this film just because it has superheroes in it.
Yeah, and not just because I do think that this is one of the most quotable movies, not only that Pixar has made, but like in general. Just it's a very quotable movie, full of things that are great. Like I saw that the American Film Institute did put a list together of best movie quotes, and for some reason, "You sly dog, you caught me monologuing" was on that list, but not "Honey, where's my super suit?" You know, like I was just like,
Yeah.
like I was just like, wait a minute. I know you guys were just looking for
I
one-liners.
do love the monologuing joke.
Yes, me too. too. But like, not only is it super quotable, but I think that there's some interesting stuff going on here with what they're trying to get at with Incredibles. Because I think that Mr. Incredible only can judge. The reason why he's so upset with himself when he's domesticated is that, like, Mr. Incredible judges himself by his accomplishments, like what he's done in his life, like what the newspapers say, what what the people think about him. So when he's hiding, he can't find any satisfaction, and I think that that's sort of an interesting take for Disney, and then going into like that Syndrome wants to make everyone super to ruin people being super, and you're like, is Syndrome like boomers being upset about participation trophies? Like I'm not like, what is that
exactly
about?
What I was going to bring up, because like I go back to that like argument that Helen and Bob have when he comes home late after like the fire.
Yes.
And that idea of just like, there's a ceremony for Dash for moving from one grade to other, and they're trying to treat it like a graduation. And he's just like, it's ridiculous. They find new ways to celebrate mediocrity, but when someone is genuinely exceptional, and you're like, wow, there's a lot of exceptionalism talk permeated throughout this movie. And it's interesting. Brad Bird has an interesting philosophy, because he's not like full objectionist. Like, he's not some like Ayn Rand nut, but there is like a balance. If you look at like, because if it was like full like fucking Fountainhead nonsense, then it wouldn't be about like serving society. It would just mostly be about like the selfish aspects of it.
Aren't we great? Aren't we awesome? Like, but there is a little bit of that going on where it's like this family it's like they tell Dash not to, like only win by a little bit, or like he couldn't do it because he would win a lot. And I think it's interesting because I think that it's kind of a microcosm for Pixar and Disney, where they hire the best in the world. Like, I'm talking, the Pixar animation department is got to be full of the greatest minds in animation ever, like ever. And then they make them make bullshit sometimes,
and then they shackle them. So there is like, there definitely is like the parallel to just like filmmakers or creatives in general, where it's just like, what did you bring me here for if you were just going to keep me on a leash?
Right? Or even just like talk about just the park workers, like the guys who put on the daily shows at Disneyland, or Disney World. They are exceptionally talented, could be in any one of the movies that they're making that day. But no, instead they're at the park doing their fifth time doing a certain show that takes like life-defying like stunts and big monologues and having to remember a bunch of shit, and also being personable to the people that you're there with, like,
and probably not being paid enough.
Yeah, probably not getting paid enough. Like, it's one of those things where it's like Disney is expecting the best to make a Midwest family happy for a minute, and they probably won't remember most of it, like, sort of thing. And I think that that's sort of interesting for Disney to tackle, like being like, oh yes, but exceptionalism, like you're kind of like, guys, you kind of put the leash on these people, like you do this, like
and it's
that's
just like
weird.
It is a philosophy I can't necessarily like wholly argue with. You're like, the whole like everyone's special Dash, which is the same thing as saying no one is. I'm like, well,
yeah,
it's an arguable one. That is a quandary.
It's a quandary, but it's like it's also one of those things that I think it's a generational thing, because I feel like boomers didn't give a shit about their kids, so Gen X was like, hey, I give a shit, here is making you feel good for what I thought was a devastating moment in my life, you know, like where they're like, oh, you lost a baseball championship that like fucked them up as kids, and their parents didn't give a shit. And now they're like, Gen X was like, okay, let me give participation trophies so everyone feels special. But then you have kind of the millennial feeling of like, oh, we're all the main character. And you're like, are you, you know, like, are you, you know, like, you're like, and then I think it keeps
life
going
ain't gonna
down
give
the
you
line.
participation trophies.
Yeah, I think it keeps going down the line, you know, like where it's like, you know, like Gen X and Gen A, it's like they're dealing with this kind of like residual.
Gen X, I think it's like Gen X, then millennials, then Gen Z or Zoomers, and now it's Gen Alpha. Because we're old enough that like we're already in another generational shift.
Yeah. And it's going to be another one very soon, because Gen Alpha is already old, you know, like Gen Alpha's getting up there, and we're going to start seeing them in the workspace, you know, like we're already seeing Gen Z like growing up and in the workspace and working.
Can't wait to see what name we come up with now. These are like fucking Pokemon versions.
Right.
Gen
like
X, Gen Alpha, Gen Z.
Right? Like
millennial
next one is just Generation Super. You're like, wait a fucking minute. Like, wait a goddamn minute. But I do think I think it's interesting as a 31-year-old, you know, I work in film, you know, I work in video, and it's interesting to see the Gen Z, and now we're getting interns who are like technically Gen Alpha, you know, like, and it's wild because all of a sudden you're like, our last intern, we were like, where were you at 9/11? And he was like, oh, I was actually born 2 days after 9/11 in New York. And we were like, God damn it. You know, like,
humans aren't supposed to exist before, aren't supposed to exist after 2001. Why are we so old?
Is this shit? And but it's interesting to see the difference in generations and how they handle this passed down guilt, you know, like that keeps coming down. And I feel like that's sort of what's happening in Incredibles here. You know? Like,
and it also makes for like interesting motivation, or at least partial motivation, besides just pettiness for Syndrome, who in the past I've gone up to bat for Syndrome as a villain. Not just because I love Jason Lee, which I do.
Yeah, which he's fantastic.
I have heard people be like, Syndrome was like an okay villain, but just kind of generic.
Oh, but those are people who would defend Elon Musk to me, you know, like, because that's what I thought this time around. I was like, oh, Syndrome's just Elon Musk. It's like
Syndrome is a great villain. Not only is he like ahead of the curve on that, like an Elon Musk type, but it's also the only time the like bitter nerd / fanboy turned villain thing has ever worked, because we've tried it a million times. We did it with Riddler in Batman Forever. We did it with Aldrich Killian in Iron Man 3. Like, we've done it we did it with Electro in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but this is the only time it's like ever worked.
No, I agree, because it doesn't rely on that he's a socially inept, you know, like that I think is the big difference, where usually the geek villain, it's like they were socially slighted, but here it's literally like he tries to go up to he meets his hero, basically, you know, like, and his hero like not what he expected, and that can be
it feels real and pathological. I was having a conversation about something similar yesterday with Rob, because he's making me rewatch the Teen Titans cartoon, which I've never been the biggest fan of, because I love George Perez's run of the comic, and it's not my Teen Titans, but it's a decent show in its own respect.
And of course, you're a Titans fan. Yeah,
I'm
just kidding.
A real Titans fan.
But
if they wanted to make the cartoon good, where's Donna Troy?
Where's Donna Troy? Yeah.
But the point is, we got to like whatever the hell that villain is called, the one that is just like, I'm the evil neckbeard who like has control of like TV and stuff. And I said, even when this episode came out, that trope was tired. And I was making a joke, it's like, it's not like the nebbish neckbeard nerds you got to worry about. It's like the fucking Manosphere Andrew Tate nut jobs that you have to worry about. And I was thinking about that, like watching this again with Syndrome. Like, he's not like socially inept, like you said, or nebbish, or like, yeah, no Big Bang Theory bullshit. It's like real and pathological. I love the
Yeah.
moment where he has that flashback to like Bob rejecting him, and it's a completely
Yeah.
different perspective than what actually happened.
Right, like, and then it gives you that actual moment of like, you can see it from Mr. Incredible's perspective of like that kid put himself in danger, like
Mm-hmm.
literally was caused a train accident, like, or you can see or you can understand that everybody has a different perspective, and from his perspective he went up to his hero and his hero shut his dream down,
Yeah.
like, and like you're
So it
just like,
speaks like
shit.
on that grayness of like kids are very impressionable, but
Mm-hmm.
also the like most organic portrayal of like a toxic nerd
Yeah.
years before that would become like a recognizable thing.
Right, like the Harley Quinn nerds that they slap in to make fun of their own show, like that, where you're like, yes, the toxic nerds, there they are, like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the nerd turned villain, it has it has a root in that, like, Spider-Man was a nerd and then he becomes, Spider-Man, like, and everyone can connect with Spider-Man in that way, or like everyone can connect, or like relatable. uh but they try to do the reverse with those villains, and it doesn't exactly land most of the time
No.
because they're not. And I know they're trying to do this to make them a villain, but they're not, like, you can't feel for them, like you
And
can't empathize most of
it's
the
also
time,
funny how like they make it more cartoonish than this
Mm-hmm.
actual cartoon. Because you look
So
at like how
true.
like subtle and just how like a real person syndrome feels, as opposed to
Yes.
something like Jim Carrey and Batman Forever. Those movies are silly, so he's like he's doing the Jim Carrey thing. But something like Electro, which even for the Amazing
Oh
Spider-Man films just
gosh,
feels like
is
so
rough.
tonally confused with like the bad comb over and the teeth, or just like what the fuck is this like
Which is,
twenty
I
year
know
old
they were
joke?
trying to be like, look, we made Jamie Foxx the coolest man alive a nerd, like, I know they were trying to go for that, where they're like, oh yes, we made Django fucking, like, like, we made him a nerd, but like at the same time you're just like, nah, no, you went too far, like you went a little too
And it's
much,
ironic
like.
because they did like the nerd aspect of Peter so well in the first Amazing Spider-Man,
Yeah.
where it's just like, yeah, he's a nerd, but yes, he can skateboard, but also he's very socially awkward and he has like these weird like physical tics. Like
Yes.
I've known kids like that. Just like that feels
Yeah.
believable, as opposed to like the stereotypical like like a pocket protector. Nah.
Yeah, it's more of, I think it's kind of one of those things where they make them pathetic,
Yeah,
and I don't know why, like, because like, they're trying to make you empathize with them, but making them pathetic doesn't exactly work, like,
hmm
because it doesn't fly, like, it
but
just doesn't.
going back to the endangerment thing. Oh, things that just hit different when you're an adult. I find the thing that made supers retire so fucking
Mm.
funny
Which,
because
okay, yeah, super funny, but it was funny. We were talking to our old roommates, and she's a nanny, and she just introduced her kid to The Incredibles,
Mhm.
and she had to explain what just happened there, because because a man tried to kill himself, the superhero saved him, and you're trying to explain to like a 3-year old that he didn't want to be saved, and in the American legal system we can sue people for that shit, like, you're just like, but obviously that doesn't actually happen in the real world, but like, so that's why it's funny, but like, the concept is
it's not
there,
like
like.
it's not too far from what I could
No.
picture actually happening though. It's in the same way
Yes.
that like Alan Moore would tackle Watchmen, just like if superheroes actually existed, it would actually
Mm.
become really fascistic. Whereas
Yeah, and
here it's
I
just like
think the
one, and
Watchmen
then this is
and
like another
Incredibles are very
perspective. If
close
superheroes
in a lot of
were a
ways.
thing, we'd probably run into this sort of legal like scuffle.
I agree with you there, because and I mean, if you haven't heard the true story before, everybody growing up brought up the lady who sued McDonald's because the coffee was hot, like,
yes.
But then you actually hear the true story of what happened, where she was handed the coffee. The coffee had been sitting there for maybe 16 hours boiling. So it's not just being made. McDonald's had left that shit boiling, and she literally, like, the cup disintegrated in her hand and burnt her lap, and she's forever having to live a different life because of that.
Yes.
Like, but as Americans, we were all like, haha, lady sued because of, because of
spilled
coffee. You're like, she's so stupid. And you're like,
and of course McDonald's was also pushing that propaganda because they didn't want to pay up.
Right. And it's like, it's messed up because they literally, it was negligence, like, and they hurt somebody, like, and we shouldn't allow big corporations to just hurt somebody like that, like, but of course,
Speaking
Americans are like suing people.
Oh God, speaking of legal departments and big corporations, you know what hits different now that I'm 30 and actually have worked at an insurance company is the stuff with Bob working at an insurance company.
God damn. Yeah, I know. Like, at first you're just like, oh, he's just a good guy. But then, like, a little bit older, you're watching it going like, shit, you just want to do this every time.
And it's so interesting just being like, remembering how well this movie is communicated, because watching this as a kid and you have no idea about insurance or like how that like world works, but you still get the sense that like this is wrong and like the Bosch is a fucking dweeb and he deserves to. Honestly, he got off easy.
I do love the boss there. I think that for what's the voice actor who voices him?
It's Wallace Shawn.
Yeah, he's so good and like so good at playing a dick, and like, and he's perfect in the.
It's also the irony of like Bob working in insurance after being a superhero and all of, like the property damage jokes and stuff like that. And there are a bunch of like little touches that they do. Like one, it's desaturated. The camera's like very like the aspect ratio hasn't changed, but like the focal length has changed. So like everything's kind of squeezed in. Everything's like very almost monochrome. There's little stuff like when he's sitting in the room being interrogated by the boss, like everything's pointing at him. The pencils are pointing at him. The desk is kind of pointing at him. There's little touches like all the slogan on the pencils is "Your life is in our hands." You're like,
yes.
Bah!
Even the little touches of, if you're watching it now, you think, and Bob thinks this too, that the notice that the boss moves on his desk is a termination notice. Bob thinks that, the audience is supposed to think that, but if you look at it, it's literally a pamphlet that says like, the company, you will pay for your own parking now, you'll buy your own food, and we've made record profits this year, like it's all like this like big like
just like to cut costs, like you need to pay for all your office supplies.
Yes. And you're like, huh? That's what I need to do my job. Like, you should pay for that. Like, but I think that that's an amazing little bit that like Bob comes in and he feels so persecuted that like he, like he feels like he has nothing to lose at that
and the
point,
fact that like he has to
really
help this old lady in a completely legal manner, but he's not supposed to, because we're supposed to screw people over to get more money. We're not supposed to let them know how this works.
He's like, legally, yes, we are supposed to help them. You're like,
just like, had there been complaints? No. Just like, are you saying we shouldn't help our customers? The law requires that I answer no. When you're just like, fuck.
It's so true. It's just more of that. This movie is not. It's like, yes, it's marketed now as a kids film because they can sell the toys, But I don't think Brad Bird was very. Like, he was like, I'm making my movie here.
Yeah, not the like
very much
stereotypical kids film, because it's still a kids film. Again, it's just a kids film that doesn't talk down to kids.
Yes, exactly. I'm not saying it's some adult, thing, but
he wasn't aiming for like that stereotypical like children's film that you would associate. I watched this movie twice leading up to this episode. Nice. Once just on its own, and then watched it again with Brad Bird's commentary. And cool. One of the things he argues, which is great because I remember this when I watched it with commentary years back on the DVD, he has like this huge rant about like people calling, and we talk about this all the time, animation as a genre. And he's just like, animation is not a genre.
Yeah.
Animation is an art form. And
Yeah.
he was joking. It's just like, if I go into one more interview and someone asks me, what's it like working in the animation genre? I'm going to punch someone.
It's so true. It's one of those things where you're like, yo, this is a medium, like that is not a genre, like this is not like it's just so like people want to put things in certain boxes and they want to diminish what it takes to make animation. And I feel like that's the real problem with being like, oh, animation is a genre. You're like, yeah, like horror is a genre. No, I don't think so. Get it together. Like you're like, come on, like that's like, because I've seen horror animated films. I've seen spy and well, now we're talking about a spy and superhero animated film. Like this is not like they do genres. It is a method. It's a form. It's an art form. Like it's not. God damn.
It's also like that's also a generational thing because we have our parents and our grandparents who like would grow up more on like the cusp of like animation becoming a bigger thing, and the idea that like it was mostly marketed for children at the beginning depending on like the case, so that's what you associate it with. And I feel like that's like, as the generation shift, it's becoming less and less of a problem, but we still have work to do. Like I'm glad that like my mom of all people is open-minded enough that like I've shown her Castlevania, I've shown her Arcane, and she loves it. And she'll
my dad
note that just like I wish I had
so.
stuff like this cartoon wise growing up.
Yeah. My dad is less so. He's called several things I've watched just cartoons, and I'm just like, it's an anime, like you're like, and it had people being cut up, like what, Dad, you watched it with me, like
it's a cartoon.
It's obviously adult. Like
you can always sense cartoon derogatory. I'm like, don't you dare.
Yeah, right.
Because
it's like
the quickest way to piss an anime fan off is to call it a cartoon.
Yeah, I love cartoons. Don't get us wrong. We love cartoons, but it is one of those words that it demeans a lot of other forms of animation.
It has it has a specific connotation.
It's kind of like how Japanese devs are being mad about the term JRPG, because they're like, no, JRPG just means that it was made in Japan and it's an RPG. You can't just call it that, like it's many other things, like, and I sort of get that, like, because I feel like it's a little bit racist in a way.
I understand the frustration, but it's also a way to differentiate, because an Eastern style of RPG is very different from a Western RPG.
True,
like
but you
Skyrim
would say that
versus
a lot of people
a Final Fantasy game are completely different philosophies, to the point where they might as well be considered separate genres.
True. I do think that a lot of our Eastern RPGs are action RPGs, and you can just say that, like you could just be like, that's an ARPG, like
not
that.
Not even on that sense. Like I'm not comparing like say like Kingdom Hearts to like a Skyrim. Even if you go back to like turn-based on both ends, very different philosophy. JRPGs tend to focus on like the power fantasy aspect, and Western RPGs are more about like the actual nitty-gritty tabletop like stats stuff.
Yeah, I feel like you can feel that with in the big difference of the two like biggest RPGs of recent years. You got Baldur's Gate, which is straight up D&D, like you are playing as that character, to being I was gonna say Persona 5, but like like lots of other
Persona's the right comparison, because you do have stuff like social stats, which has like visual novel elements, but it's still that like JRPGs are doing all the math for you.
Yes,
you're getting the most like streamlined version of that, so you don't have to worry about that stuff. I felt that way when I got two of my friends into Knights of the Old Republic who have only played JRPGs. So when they start the game and they're just like, Constitution, Strength, what the fuck is this? Just like, that's the fair. RPG elements of the RPG.
That's very fair, actually. I like that. But, yes, do not call... I wouldn't even call this a cartoon, Like, I just wouldn't, Like, I wouldn't call The Incredibles a cartoon in any way.
That's why we have the term film. Like animated film, animated series.
You're like, come on, mate. But back to like to The Incredibles. I do think because we were talking about the downfall of the superheroes, and it's funny, like it's a good joke and everything, but it's sort of interesting because like what is it saying? Like what is it that like, yes, shove those people down, like, but also we're supposed to see that as a bad thing, like we're supposed to be like, okay, that's bad, like, and then the private company steps in and starts hiring the superheroes, in both of these movies. It's like it's the private sector who steps in to lift these people up. And is that what they're going for here? Is that like the government might keep you unexceptional, but private companies will lift you up? You're like,
not
I don't know about
necessarily,
that.
because I think maybe more so in the second film, because the second film is very confused.
Yes.
But in the first film, you do have like that give and take of just like, wow, I finally get the opportunity for like a private sector to do my thing. But they're also the bad guys, it turns out. So it is that gray area of just like there are exceptional people, and especially depending on where especially depending on like where you've been brought up, we tend to like to squash people like that. It's just like stay in your lane.
Yeah.
What makes you think you're special?
I do think it's interesting to compare this to, say, a My Hero Academia, or even X-Men, because like they make the argument here that like once everyone's special, no one's special, and then you look at My Hero and you're like, everyone's fucking special, like, and guess what? It's still rad, like you're
there
just
are quirkless people in My Hero Academia.
Yeah, but like yes, and they make a big deal out of that. I feel like they do a good job of being like, this is we're saying something here, like, but I do think it's interesting that like that the private companies weren't hiring them before that, because it's one of those things that they knew superheroes existed, and wouldn't you think you would want those superheroes with super strength to do whatever crazy thing you need to do? But like, but that's what the movie's saying, I guess, is that like the society was like, no, stay down, even if,
but I appreciate
even if
that,
it would
like,
be helpful.
This film is always just frank about the way it talks about these subjects. Like, I think about the argument that Helen and Bob have in the apartment. I always think about that talk that Helen has with Violet and Dash after they've like survived the plane crash, about like, this isn't like those shows you used to watch as a kid. These people will kill you.
I love that moment because it first off to me says, like, this is not your normal kids film, because now we're explaining to the kids that we're not dealing with cartoon villains here, like that these people will kill you. They don't care, like they're not going to have some mercy about this. They're going to kill you. And like, I think that that's such a genius like moment, because it speaks to the kids and it speaks to the adult audience and is like, hey, like there's some stakes, and there are even here.
Like
it
moments,
adds stakes,
and there are even moments that you like don't catch the first time, like when Violet jumps in front of Dash and then uses the shield and they start like running like in the hamster ball thing. Violet doesn't know that she can do that.
Yeah,
she jumps in front of Dash to take the bullet because her brother's about to get shot, and then she gets lucky that the shield comes up.
Right? Pretty crazy. Pretty great. Like, and I do love when she does her powers a couple times, she like puts her head down and throws her hands up, very like Phoenix from X-Men, but it's like, it's so like part of the character, where Dash is keeping his head up the whole time, and like, and so is Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl, but like Violet does not, like, and I think that's such a cool.
It's really funny that The Incredibles is the only good Fantastic Four movie.
Fuck, you're so right. God damn it.
I mean,
God damn it.
You're right. It's down to the point where like two of the members of the Incredibles families have the exact same powers as two Fantastic Four members. Violet is the Invisible Woman. It's the invisibility, but also like shields and stuff. Yep. And Elastigirl has like the flexibility, the stretchy stuff.
Mr. Fantastic.
That's Mr. Fantastic.
And then Jack can turn into the Human Torch. So you're like, hey, like that's pretty crazy. I do think that the family dynamic and the stakes of having the family there is what keeps this movie interesting. And that's why they fuck it up so bad in Incredibles 2, because literally in the middle of watching it, Mary turned to me and she goes, "What's the stakes here?" And I go, "Oh, they're gonna crash the boat into the thing and all the superheroes won't be." You're like, "Oh, I have to explain the stakes." That's bad stakes.
It doesn't matter. Like, Incredibles 2,
if you're even
one, it
thinking about
recycles
what
the
stakes are.
exact. For one, it recycles the exact same plot beats, except it's a role reversal.
Which,
and two, it doesn't explore.
I like that they're building on the characters. I do like that, but it just feels like it's not a natural.
I describe Incredibles 2 as the rushed sequel we would have gotten years ago, not the sequel we should have gotten like over a decade later. Like, this shit would have been straight to video back in the day.
Yeah, and it would be on Disney Plus right now, you know.
Yeah, this would be like a straight to Disney Plus like follow-up, not like a true follow-up. Because you think you get to the end, and we've taken so long to get to a sequel that you're like, all right, well, the superhero genre in film has completely changed since The Incredibles came out. We could really tie into that. It's also been so long that obviously the actor for at least Dash, because Violet was already voiced by a grown woman, would be too old. So maybe we do a time skip and we really go into like how much things have changed since like supers were able to come back and like what we do things differently now. But no, we just decided to have it take place right after the first one ends, and we just do nothing with any of those interesting ideas.
They separate the characters, which is a huge mistake. You know, like, I feel like they like in the first one, it's like Bob goes off on his own and they all have to go after Bob. But like, at least they're all going together there. In this one, Elastigirl goes by herself. Bob has to go do stuff with Jack, and he's working with the family, but it's all very separated. And I know they're just trying to give everyone time, but that means that there's none of the family dynamic going on.
It's also just like, it's so paint by numbers. Just like, we made a big deal of just like the world is opened. I hate it. We bring this up a lot. At least I do. The like Men in Black 2 problem of we've opened up the world. We have endless possibilities, and then we go for the easiest, smallest idea we can think of.
I remember like, loving the world's Men in Black 2 as a kid, but like now rewatching it, you're like, god damn it.
Yeah, you liked it because it just reminded you of the first one, because it's just the greatest hits of the first one again. And it's one of those things where it's just like, oh, the world's opened up. Supers can potentially come back. How things could potentially be different. What do? We defeat the Underminer, and they have to go into hiding again.
Yeah. You're like, what? Like, so that happened a week later, like the triumph of the first movie is just gone, Like, you're like, cool.
And not like, even in like a clever subversive way. Like, we're not trying to like empire it or anything. Just in a like, we don't know what to do, so we're just going to recycle what we already did.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the great thing about Incredibles, is that it's endlessly cool the whole time, with the spy theming going on, but also it actually feels like a family drama, and like every family member actually is important here. And the thing is that I do love Bob and Helen. I love them, like, I think they're great characters, but I gotta say, I enjoy Dash and Violet so much more, even in the rewatch as an adult. I loved them as kids, but like as an adult, I'm even more like, they bring the fucking energy to this, like they change it up. And I feel like there's that just whole middle part of Incredibles 2 that just feels like they're just throwing shit at the wall and eating their own tail meta-wise. And here, that is not happening, like, it is such a whoosh right towards the end, and I fucking love that.
And this is,
and it really took Buzz and Violet, sorry, but it takes
Dash.
The kids, Dash, sorry, I don't know why I call him Buzz, but it takes Dash and Violet to like amp it up in the second movie. Like, once they're introduced to the actual action, you're like, okay,
it's also a movie that justifies its runtime, because for like something under the Disney or Pixar umbrella, because I don't think Disney had bought Pixar yet at this point. It might have been maybe soon after.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, because there was a few years and a couple movies before they outright bought Pixar.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, under that umbrella, like, you expect 90 minutes. This is an over 2-hour movie, but it knows that it needs to be.
Yes, exactly. It's not meandering around. There's no wasted space here. I
And
often
Dash,
talk about how structure bothers me on this podcast, and Incredibles is one of those extremely well structured movies. It just freaking moves. It's able to keep its characters and its action interesting, and it doesn't feel like I'm sitting there being like, "What the fuck are we up to?" Like
yeah.
it happens in Incredibles 2. You're like,
And
"What
going
the
back
fuck?"
to Dash and Violet, it helps that they work so much because it is
Yeah,
so easy to introduce a
kids.
child character into a
Mhm.
story like this and have them be annoying.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
I don't know
I
about
feel
you, but
like
like I never, as a kid, I never related to like, oh, we have to put a child character in this superhero dynamic because that'll be the one that the kid projects onto. I was never that kid. I'm like, I don't care
I
about
know.
this.
It's one of those things that I think one of the most recent examples that is kind of bad and is, but you can argue for it, is Bad Batch and their, what's the name of
Omega.
her Omega. You're like, because she's fine for most of it,
Yeah.
but then there's moments where you're like, oh my god, just let the Bad Batch do what they're doing instead of Omega getting in trouble. Like, can we
Yeah.
please, I
Just like,
just want
we couldn't
that.
just have like the badass like wet works mercenary clone troop? We had to have a kid in there.
Yeah. And you're like, I get it. It's Star Wars and you have to like, and there is a big kid audience there. But now we have young Jedi adventures, we have these other things, or even Resistance, which I don't recommend, but we have actual kid products in Star Wars. So I don't understand it's because they're like, oh, Ahsoka was so big, we got to make another Ahsoka, and Omega is not another Ahsoka. You're like,
Mm-mm.
oh, was that a well planned out character with Ahsoka, and this is nothing. Like it's just
Yeah, and
nothing.
Ahsoka was also
Which I
like
haven't
more of
started
a,
the
and
last
Ahsoka
season,
was
so I
also
can't
like a
talk.
teenager as opposed to like a little kid.
Yes, it's true. It's very true. And we do get young Ahsoka, but like even then, you're not like, damn, what the fuck is this? You're like, yeah, young Ahsoka. You're like, yeah, let's see. Like I wanted to know more about that character, not Omega, where you're like, you're literally another clone. You're just another clone. Like, come on, like let's move on. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that that's the interesting part here is that that the kids in the Incredible are so well realized and
Yeah.
so well done, and Violet sounds like a teenager, like when they're talking at the same time too, that shit cracks me up. Like them both talking at the same time is so good and so well done too, because it's not easy to edit and do well, and it works so well in this movie, especially when they're like talking on the plane, when they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, mom, we're just dumb. Yeah. At the same time, like I love that. One of my favorite, most like satisfying moments in the movie is kind of a funny little moment that I wanted to bring up, is that when the robot is pulling Bob and it cracks his back, and then the laugh he does is so satisfying, but it's also such a great superhero moment. Like it's such a perfect Superman moment, where
Mm-hmm.
you're just like, oh no, you weren't gonna kill him, you just made him more limber,
Yeah.
and I love that. And his laugh there is so good. It's just like, and then he goes and kicks the crap out of it,
Just fantastic performances, obviously, like across the board. Like Craig T.
uh-huh.
Nelson as Bob, and her name's escaping me for Elastigirl right now.
Oh, I'll look it up on IMDb. Don't worry. But I agree. The cast here is amazing, and I mean, of course, Samuel L. Jackson. Now it's like it feels like standard now to have
Mm-hmm.
him in a voice role, But at the time,
Wasn't as common.
it wasn't as common. Yeah, Craig T. Nelson, Samuel L. Jackson, and Holly Hunter as
Holly Hunter, yeah.
Elastigirl.
There we go.
And then of course Jason Lee as Buddy.
Which is definitely like sort of against type for Jason Lee. Like you wouldn't picture Jason Lee in a role like this for Syndrome. The closest thing to like a villainous part he had played was like Azazel in like Dogma, but you don't really picture
Yes.
Jason Lee as like a megalomaniacal like supervillain, but it really works.
What I mean, of course, we have to bring up that Brad Bird himself voices Edna Mode, and like we were talking about quotable lines, everything out of Edna Mole's mouse is
Mode.
quotable. Like we literally say it at my family parties. We say like Edna lines all the time. You know, like it's just like one of the Incredibles is one of those movies that like my family just quotes. You know, like and like she. It's I think it's amazing that he does the voice for her. You
It's
know,
also
because
it's
it's
also
so just natural. It feels
it's
so like I never would have thought. You
I
know,
don't
like
know if this is like anecdotal or not, or if it's actually true, but I did hear that like originally they were going to cast Lily Tomlin in that role,
yes.
and they were using Brad Bird as the temp, and then
Yes,
they
I
all and
actually
then she
did read that.
yeah, and
That
then she
that
heard the
he
temp. It's just like,
was
what do you
just
need me for?
doing
You
it.
have the voice.
Yeah. I
And I
I had
love
heard that he was doing it like he when he was showing storyboards, he would
yeah.
do Edna Mode's voice and they were kind of like, "Yeah, okay. Yeah, no. You're already it, you know, like you do please do it,
What
you
I
know,
love
like
about Edna is that she's much more of an interesting archetype, because you tend to have like
yeah.
a Lucius Fox or like a
A
character like that. It's
Q.
just like who
Yeah.
makes the tech or makes the or the Q, who like makes the tech or makes the costumes. I love that they leaned like sort of like a Coco Chanel like fashion
Yes.
designer type who's made this a whole business and lifestyle. I'm like, that is way more interesting than just like the tech guy who like adds the cool stuff to the suits. And it's way
Mhm.
more out of the box. And it
Yes.
also sort of
And
it also
so
fits like
funny.
that period that they're trying to capture.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I do love how upset she is in Incredibles 2 that an actual fashion designer did Elastigirl's new suit. Like, she's like, how upset she is about that cracks me up. You know, like, I gotta say, Edna's the best part of
I do
Incredibles
feel
2.
bad
You
about
know,
her
like,
shitting on the, because I don't know about you, but I actually prefer the first Mr. Incredible costume. I like the blue black.
I do like it.
I
I
like the blue black a
do
lot.
like that they're all wearing the same thing, you know, like, and it looks cool. But yeah, there's something to that original costume that feels right. But we're also blue Batman fans. So what, you know, like me and you would be like, best Batman suit, is it blue? You know,
Yeah.
like, you know,
Even when
like,
we were watching The Flash, you're just like, this movie has problems, but you know what? Affleck looks pretty good with the blue
yeah,
cape and cowl. They actually did the blue, and it actually kind of works.
it kind of flies. But I do think that is you know it's funny, you know, like because I think the Elastigirl original costume is great, and I do think that the new Elastigirl costume in 2 is quite good. You know, like it is fantastic. You know, like you're just like, okay, you know, like it's not the same, but it is something else. Um, but I will say, the one of the things that I think is the most adult, and it's one of my favorite monologues in anything really, is Edna Mode's Cape monologue here. First off, it's literally a montage where 5 to 6 superheroes die in quick succession on screen most of the time, you know, like, and it's one of those things where you're like, oh shit, you know, like they don't that's not a normal Disney thing, you know, like that's not a normal Pixar thing just to be like, we're killing them, you know, like they're all dead, you know, like it's just the way she moves through it all
Yeah.
is so funny, but also extremely dark in a lot of ways. You're like, oh shit.
Yeah, it's darkly funny, and that's what I like about it. We used
Yeah.
to we used to be a proper nation. We could actually kill our fucking villains.
It's true. It's true.
Or in just Disney case outside of the Pixar space, we used to just fucking have villains that were just evil and they were just fun to watch, as opposed to like a twist villain that's revealed in the third act that has
Right.
like no dimension.
Right. You're like, even here where Mirage betrays Syndrome, it's not the same as
Yeah.
like, oh, now she's good, you know, like, which me and Mary were saying, why was Mirage not the bad guy in Incredibles 2? You know, like that would have worked where it's like, oh yeah, I helped you, but I still was Syndrome's head, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
the number 2, you know, like, and like that, I feel like that would have fucking worked where it was like a betrayal of them, where they like believed in Mirage again, but of course Mirage is attracted to power, and it's like,
Yeah.
so that I feel like that would
As
have worked so much better
as
than
opposed to
these people.
my dad was dying and the supers didn't show up a minute after I needed them to, so I
I
need to
know.
destroy the supers.
You're like, what? What is that shit? You know, like, what is that? Like, I don't know. It's bad. But
What
besides
a
the
fucking
point,
waste of Bob Odenkirk and Catherine Keener. God damn it, Incredibles 2.
I know, right? You're like, great cast, but damn it. I I do think that Kate, the not only is that Kate monologue great, but it shows off even more, and then you see it later when he's going through the index of dead superheroes. But how good and simple these superhero designs are, like just so good. And then for some reason, the whole group in Incredibles 2 that they grew up with are just terrible characters. All bad. Like none of it's original except for the guy who
Yeah.
pukes lava. And
It
like that's it.
highlights the just from an aesthetic standpoint, because they were trying to, like, this is supposed to be like classic pulpy superhero stuff. You compare like the simplicity and like how perfect like these costumes
Of
are in this
Gazer
movie
Beam.
to like, and then fast forward like over a decade, like 20 years now, into like the superhero genre in real life, and you see like just how like over designed and like militaristic all the like MCU costumes are now.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's interesting that in universe for this, how that the superheroes do work for the government, so they all have military training. And I think that that's sort of an interesting take that's like in universe of this, is that Elastigirl knows military flight call outs. Like she says when she's flying the plane, she's saying all these actual, like the actress actually learned a bunch of like flight terminology and like brought it to this, and like actual military terminology being used there. But I think it's a great in universe thing that, like, oh yes, we had superheroes, but they were working for the government, so we trained them, you know, like. And I think that that's an interesting little thing going on there. You're like, oh, okay, wouldn't usually pick up on that.
Yeah,
but
and
like,
it's a way to do it without like deflecting somewhat, because I feel like we try to like move it a slightly askew. It's just like, well, we don't want to say it's the straight up government. It's a shield.
Shield. It's not the government.
We don't want to go there. We don't want to push any buttons.
But to go back to it, I do think that the just the simplicity of the suits that they show off in the Kate monologue, and then when he's going through all the dead superheroes, they're all so fucking good.
Which is a haunting scene. It's a haunting scene when he like watches like all the heroes who die, and then one hero succeeds and actually beats the Omnidroid, but then they upgrade it and it just comes back and kills them anyway.
Yeah, and just the it's the close-ups too. It's like it's the wide shot of the screen, and as it's moving, it's starting to go with Bob's heartbeat, and then you see Bob's eyes as it's like a close-up of his eyes as he's scanning everything, and it's just this beautiful horrible realization that like this one man has killed all these superheroes, you know, like, and you're just like, what? Shit. Yeah, for what? Just to be, you know, like just to show that he could, you know, like,
yeah,
what, you know,
like it's haunting. It's also a nice touch. Another thing I caught watching this again is that all the when you look at who's at Bob's wedding, all the heroes that are in the second row are killed off.
I know. I felt that too. I was like, oh God. You're like, yeah, and I feel like that's the thing there too, is that they like emphasize that the heroes know each other, you know, like they work together.
Another one last shot at Incredibles 2. The movie beyond the Underminer stuff was originally supposed to open with like an in memoriam for the heroes that like Syndrome had killed, to recognize that was like a tragedy in the superhero community, that like all these known entities were just killed off that way. Like if you look up the production for Incredibles 2, you'll find that a lot of cut scenes would have made that movie better. Just like, you guys cut out all your best stuff.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those movies that you could feel somebody stepped in. I'm not saying it's Bob Iger, but it probably was. But it's like somebody stepped in and said their piece, and they fucked it up, you know, like,
Not gonna
and
say
like,
who, but it
and that's
rhymes
kind
with
of
Rob Tiger.
Rob Tiger. But it's one of those things that, like, that's sort of what The Incredibles is saying there. The original, the Incredibles is saying, like, hey, you know, like, you could try to control superhero, like, exceptional people, but like, we do need them, question
Mhm.
mark, you know, like, it's kind of like we shouldn't try to shove down this you know, like, people who are great at stuff, you know, like, just to benefit other people, you know, like, and sure, there is the, like, oh god, to Aaron Rand of that, but then there's the just being like, hey, in American exceptionalism is the reason we're where we are in a lot of
Yeah,
ways, but
that's the thing. Like
also
it
American
rides that
exceptionalism
line.
is
That's why
money,
I
you
said
know.
like I have heard people like call Brad Bird an exceptionalist. I'm like, no, if you watch his work, it's not really there. It's just
Yeah.
talking about it as a philosophical point. Like if he was actually an exceptionalist, like all these movies would have very different endings.
Yes, because like you're saying, that it's like they're superheroes not because they're great, but because they can do great good, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like, and it's not just like with great power comes great responsibility bullshit. It literally is like, okay, no,
Yeah,
like,
because
you know,
inherently,
like,
like the philosophy of like objectionism specifically is very self-centered, and
yes,
none of these
exactly.
movies are self-centered. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's like it not only is Incredibles about family, but it's about like doing better and protecting people. You know, like,
So it's
it's
like
like,
some of the ideas, but also like how does this benefit people? How does this benefit society? As opposed to how
mm,
does this benefit me?
me. Yeah, and that's why I think Syndrome. I was saying like Elon Musk, but it's like it's very much that where it's like, you know, like, I was hurt. I was the one who's the victim, you know, instead of those people on the train he hurt, or
Mm-hmm.
anything else, you know, like, it's like, or that Bomb Voyage got off and probably bombed more people, you know, like, you're just like, no, I was hurt. I'm the victim here. Let me make it everyone else's problem, you know, like, and you're just like, like,
It's
you're just
also
like, oh shit.
super funny, and I think they had mentioned this in like the behind the scenes stuff. It's funny that Syndrome looks like Brad Bird if you actually look at a picture of them side by side. I think
Yeah,
Brad Bird's
very
joked
similar.
about it. It's just like that wasn't the intention, but the animators thought they were funny.
I will say The Incredibles does a great job of doing, um it's like they're cartoony, you know, like everybody's like, Bob is huge, but like the way they do him actually having fat on his body is super realistic, you know, like, where it's not and I don't think that he's like, you know, like, it's one of those things where it's hard to be like, because you're not trying to be like, oh, he's better now because he's skinnier. It's like, no, he still had the strength, obviously. He just, it's about putting the muscles back into place, getting back into it, you know, more than it
Yeah, and it
is
makes it feel
like
more real,
shaming of fat people
and
in
it
any
also
way,
makes
because
it feel
Syndrome is still bigger here,
yeah,
you know, like, he's got a belly, and like, and I don't think they're saying they're just showing that Syndrome isn't using any of his muscles
and it
there,
also
you know,
helps
like,
that
he's just using his things, his
it also
gadgets.
helps that they keep it realistic for his age. That even though he gets into
Mm,
shape, he's not like the same size as he used to be in his glory days. Like
right.
he's still big. He's
Yeah.
just like a healthier big.
Yes, exactly. And I think that that's just a great little like detail that they added, you know, because it's not, you know, like, oh, like, of course Elastigirl can be any shape she wants, but like your rubber band can be any shape it wants, but it has a resting position, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like, and it goes back. And I thought, I was like asking Mary that, I'm like, do you think Elastigirl makes her ass that big, you know, like, I was like, and she was like, no, I think that like an elastic band, it just goes back to its shape, and that's the way she's built. And you're like, yeah,
You could
sure,
tell
I'm
that's
sure
where it
Pixar
goes
is
because she has
weird.
that moment where she looks at her reflection and
Yeah,
she sighs, just like, "Oh God."
yeah, right, she like, even she's like, I can't
She's
just
self
stretch
conscious
that.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah, right, like, she's
which
like, I can't just stretch that, which you're
it
like,
ain't a problem,
feel that. Yeah, yeah. Deshaun, you're just as
as you'll
bad as
find.
the Pixar
E-
people.
Dude, I'm not as bad
Animators.
as like people blatantly are, like, on fucking social media. But even as a kid, I'm like, ain't a problem.
No, I mean, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. But like, but I do, every time I do see Elastigirl, I'm like, Pixar, what the fuck? Like, it's just like, you're like, damn, guys. Like, I know she's supposed to be sexy, like, obviously from the very first scene when she's doing you got to be more flexible, is very sexy and fun and spy like, like, where it's just like,
but then like
kind
the
of like
fucking wagon comes swinging out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then again, I mean, we grew up with Dexter's Lab, so what do we know?
Yes. What do we know? We were set this way. But I do think it's an interesting thought, there, where you're like, oh, she can change any shape, but like, you're still you at the end of the day.
This also highlights like how interesting elastic powers can actually be when you're creative about it.
Oh,
and also just
dude,
how
I freak out every time she takes the man cover and pulls it around a pole and launches it like an arrow. I freak out every time. It's just so fucking cool. Like, it's just so cool. I can't deny it. Like, it's one of the coolest little action bits in the whole fucking movie.
You need to think outside the box. You don't need to go like full Plastic Man with your elastic powers, especially depending on how grounded that version of the elastic powers are. But you can be creative. It also highlights like how much easier it is to pull it off in animation. Because we've had, let's see, 3, technically 4 if you count the fucking Roger Corman film, Fantastic Four movies, and varying degrees of success with those elastic powers. It was one of my big concerns for Netflix, like One Piece. Just like, we can't even do like the elastic powers for like big budget movies. What makes you think this Netflix show is going to be able to pull it off?
Even Miss Marvel, they were like, yo, we're not doing her elastic powers. Now she just does like psi stuff.
It's like projections. It's like almost Green Lantern-y. You're like, okay.
Yeah, which like as a filmmaker, I see what they were doing there. Like, I really do. But as a comic book fan of her original powers, you're kind of like, the fuck is this shit? Like, you're like, what? Why? Like, what?
And
like,
don't even bring up the like, well, we already have Mr. Fantastic. We can't have 2 stretchy people. Meanwhile, DC has Black Lightning and Static. Who cares?
Yeah, who cares? And they were both on the same show, like, you're like, damn, like, both times too, when they did the live action Black Lightning, they brought in Static, like, you're kind of like, both times they can come together, and it's not like, oh, well, we just negate each other out, like, you're like, come on. Like,
it just goes back to that, like, the Suicide Squad joke. Are you having a laugh?
Yeah.
You thought you chose me for my skills. He does exactly what I do.
He does exactly what I do, but cooler. But I do think that The Incredibles is one of those, just it's absolutely stands out from the Pixar crowd.
How long?
And that's a fantastic crowd. Like, oh my goodness, is
especially
some of the best
early on
movies
like
ever
made.
You know,
there is something to be said about like that wondrous like early Pixar era where it's just like 4 dudes with like these great concepts that they had cooking for a long time, and then once we sort of got away from that and things started to get a little homogenized, and Pixar still puts out good stuff, but there's something to be said about like that early like original like brainchild stuff,
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of those things that I like, what is the last Pixar movie? What was it? It's like, I mean, it's Elemental. And
which I heard was better than it looked.
Yes, I've heard it's a good romantic comedy, It's just wild that it like is a Pixar movie.
I have to remind myself that like, don't trust the trailers, because all trailers for children's entertainment are crap.
Yes. Oh,
the trailers are always terrible. They always make the movie look worse.
But okay, so if we go through it though, you got the early years. You got Toy Story, Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, then The Incredibles, and then right after that is one of the biggest blemishes to film ever, Cars.
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop their fucking just keep going. They do Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, Toy Story 3, but then I feel like this is where we start to hit the problem We get, because Disney finally bought it. I feel like that's where we are. And you get Cars 2, Brave, Monsters University. At least we get Inside Out, but then you get the terribleness of The Good Dinosaur. And Finding Dory is okay.
Finding Dory's not bad.
Yeah, it's not bad. Cars 3 is unnecessary, but I know that to me, the Cars was just not my generation. Like I didn't like it because I don't give a shit about cars.
I don't
but
know.
Like in general, but there's younger kids who really do care about those movies and like see them as their franchise.
My primary problem with Cars.
Panda.
My primary problem with Cars is just as a premise. It looks like what you would spoof a Pixar movie to be rather than an actual Pixar movie. Like Cars could be a fucking Family Guy skit.
Yeah, no, and it, yeah, really, you're just like, oh, we just attach eyes to cars and now they talk and boom, Pixar, but then we still get Coco, you get Incredibles 2, but then you get Toy Story 4, and Onward is okay. I think Onward is it's okay, like it could have been better. Soul, we already did a whole episode on that, fantastic. Luca is undeniable. I think it's great. I don't think anybody can watch that and be upset. Is one of those things. Turning Red is fun. I wasn't as upset as I thought it was going to be another bad kind of a mediocre Pixar movie, but Turning Red's pretty fun. A lot of ways it's saying a nice message in a great way. But then you get Lightyear. And you're just like, why? Yeah. And then you get Elemental.
Even when we have the good highlights, it's slowly becoming more and more homogenized as time goes on, and you're like, how long had it been since you had seen The Incredibles before you rewatched it for this?
So I've watched it a ton, but back when, right before they put out Incredibles 2, they were putting out 3D versions of Pixar movies, and I remember I had seen Incredibles in theaters originally, so when they were like, hey, we're putting out Toy Story and Incredibles in 3D, I was like, I'm fucking there, let me go see it, yes, now 3D is such a fad, but it was a great time because we got re-releases of movies in 3D, that you would have never been able to see in theaters again, and it's Incredibles is meant to be seen in theaters. It's great to see it on television, but and on your TV at home, but it's meant to be seen in theaters. It's big, it's bombastic. Those explosions fucking rock your seat if it's done right,
all the action set pieces are just so good. You brought up the final fight with the man cover and stuff like that, but we had also talked about the energy that Dash and Violet bring to it, which is probably the most impressive set piece in the movie. And it's also a good demonstration of how to do super speed, because we're getting a little, ever since we did Quicksilver in Days of Future Past, we've gotten a little obsessed with I am so fast that I stop time, which is a problem because it makes it really hard to actually consider anything a threat to someone who's that fast. Yes. With the Flash, it's appropriate, but even then, it should be a thing when you're doing it in live action that maybe that's your top speed that you're able to stop time, but you need to work for that.
Hitting it,
but you kind of ruin any potential stakes if you can just stop time at any time because you're so fast.
And they do, and I think Dash is a great example of that, because they do that. He couldn't get caught on tape at first, and you're like, okay, that's really fast, that, he's able to not be seen moving, basically. But then later on, you have him running from these guys, and you're kind of thinking oh, if he was able to disappear before, he should be able to go faster. But it's one of those things that then they show that he's able to run on water or do any of the other crazy stuff he does here. And you're kind of there you go. You're able to show the speed without being he's not, you can't even see him, he's gone.
Yeah.
Boom, boom.
And there's also a really nice, subtle character moment there where he's in the caverns and you have the two dudes coming his way. And the solution is not to just run faster, is to just stop for a sec.
I do love that. Yeah,
It's like,
I mean,
that's
it's definitely a
character stuff.
reference. It's definitely a reference to Star Wars, but it is still very good. Like it's. I mean, that whole scene is a Yavin 4 reference, but at the same time, it's fun. Like you're like, there's a reason why the Yavin, George Lucas did it for Return of the Jedi. But like that's besides the point. But I think that the action here is fantastic. The characters are fantastic. The music is great. It's just that's why I think Incredibles 2 is so disappointing. Is that like this feels so effortlessly cool and well put together, and feels like it's got layers and deepness. And then Incredibles 2, like you said, feels like a rushed sequel that we would have gotten a year later, not 2004 to 2018. Like,
and it's like,
what?
It's one of those things where, like, once again, I must hold myself back from being mean to people. I have to. Don't be mean to people just because they like Incredibles 2. Because plenty of people I knew came out of it just like, I liked it. It was fun. It's just like,
to be fair, it's not like, if you're just taking it if you're not upset, like, and you just take it, it's okay. Like it's not offensively bad in some ways. I think that obviously we were very upset about certain things here, but like it's like for a normal viewer, like just going into it, it's not well, I mean, the example's there. It's not a Cars 2. It's not we're getting Inside Out 2 this year. I don't think that's gonna work. Like
I don't think it's necessary.
Doubts. Yeah, it's first off not necessary. Also, you could have not called it Inside Out 2. Like you could have called it Inside Out somebody's name, or like like there's other ways to make this a sequel without slapping the 2 next to it. And I feel like,
well, we live in a world where there was a movie called Now You See Me, and they called it Now You See Me 2 instead of Now You Don't.
Yeah.
Remember that? It's just like that. It's right there.
It's right there. It's right there. But they wouldn't have known. No, the audience wouldn't know it's a sequel. Like, I mean, we're joking, but literally, people didn't know The Dark Knight was a sequel to Batman Begins because it didn't say Batman 2. Like it, and they obviously feel that way with the Batman Part 2. They obviously feel like the audience can't fucking handle it. Like,
although I just feel like that fits the tone because it has like when you put a Part 2 with a Roman numeral, it's classy.
It's classy.
I'm like, I don't mind that.
Godfather.
But it is one of those things where it's why we get shit like Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery.
Yeah. You're just like, why can we not just say Glass Onion? Everyone knows what the fuck this is.
It reminds me of like what Francis Ford Coppola once said about the Godfather movies. Just like, when I made Godfather Part 2, they fought me so hard because I wanted that Part 2. You can't do it a Part 2. It's going to imply that you have to watch the first one. And then when I directed Godfather Part 3, they fought me because I wanted to call it The Death of Michael Corleone, and they're like, no, you have to call it Part 3. So look how the pendulum like swung back.
Yeah, and now it's Godfather Part 3, The Death of Michael Corleone, Coda. So like, so you're like, okay, Coppola got his way, but at what cost? Like, which. Yes, and I think I told you I watched Coda like at my dad's house when it was just like on TV recently, and I was just like, oh my, you definitely saved it, like this is much better, but not in like a wow, I can watch this now sort of way.
I would not. I would argue it's not much better. I would argue it's marginally better.
But my thing is that I like, when I first watched Godfather Part 3, I could like feel the throw up in my mouth, like when I was younger, and it was just like, oh, this is bad, like I can tell it is, like, and watching Coda, I was like, this feels more like it, like just the tone, everything is a little bit more what it's supposed to be instead
it's
of
still not gonna save Sofia Coppola's performance.
Bad. Still fucking bad. But that's not it's still one of the worst sequels of all time.
But hey,
like that's but hey.
Yeah.
But again, I wouldn't say that about Incredibles 2, really. To bring it back, is that I wouldn't be like, The Incredibles 2 is one of the worst sequels of all time. It's fine. But that's the problem, is that Incredibles is amazing. And I constantly, at our family parties, are like, honey, where's my super suit?
Yeah, it's
Why
like,
do you need to know?
Incredibles 2 isn't the worst thing in the world, but it still highlights like all the problems that like a lot of modern Pixar films have.
Yep, exactly. So, Deshaun, I say Incredibles 1 goes on the shelf, of course. I
Of course.
don't have the Blu-ray, but I have the DVD downstairs. Oh, he's got the Blu-ray. Now, guys, we're saying that because Disney Plus has already shown that they'll get rid of movies, even ones that are big, off of their platform.
Yeah,
and
even
maybe
if
put
it's
it
stuff
somewhere
like
else,
in-house,
or
like they'll
maybe
just
not.
fucking take it off for a little bit.
Right? It's just one of those things where you're just like, what? Because it's supposed to be, you know, like originally pitched, the Disney Plus was supposed to be the vault's open now, you have it all.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not the case. And it's one of those things that especially nowadays, you got to own these things so you can actually watch your favorite movies when you actually want to watch them, and instead
and then
of
even
letting them control you.
And even if it's something that you do have access to, who knows how much they might have like altered it. Because maybe there's a certain thing that like doesn't hold up to modern standards, so instead of just putting a disclaimer at the beginning, which is all they need to do, they decide to like edit it out.
Yeah. And I think obviously Deshaun brought up the commentary track. I think the Incredibles has some amazing behind the scenes, and yes, you can watch them on Disney Plus at the moment, but for how long? And you know, like with the increase in prices of Disney Plus, a lot of people might be dropping off.
And not every like streaming service, most streaming services obviously don't even add stuff like that. Like I was shocked that when Barbie got put on Max, that they included a version of the movie to watch with Greta Gerwig's commentary, because they never do that. And the thing is, they're only doing that because that's Barbie. Barbie made fucking bank, but not everything's going to get that. Whereas here, like, you have 2 commentary tracks. You have one with Brad Bird, and you have one with the entire animation team. You have like fucking 10 people on that commentary track.
That's cool.
So if you're into that medium and you want to know how the sausage gets made, that's the stuff. That's always my favorite feature on any Blu-ray. Is like, I love me a commentary track.
I love any behind the scenes features. Those are always my favorites. So like, and Pixar's very good about doing really big ones, you know, like, and same thing for Disney, you know,
there is great really making of stuff for like the Toy Story Blu-rays.
Yeah. And even Disney, like there's such good behind the scenes making of stuff for like Aladdin and Lion King, you know, like, and you literally can't get that even on Disney Plus at the moment, you know, like, and it's because, you know, they phased it out or they don't have it. And like, it's worth purchasing these things if you care about them like that, you know, like, because you might not see that ever again.
It's why I still haven't gotten
disappear.
It's like why I still haven't gotten Lord of the Rings on 4K yet, because the versions that they have extended, but they don't have the appendices. I'm like, I'm not fucking getting this without the appendices.
You're like, no, you put out a half product. Give me the whole thing. Give me the whole thing. And I agree, because that's the reason why I haven't bought it. And I still have my really nice, you know, the red, the green, the blue.
Yeah, the DVDs. I have like that. I have like that gold Blu-ray set, which still has the appendices. So you're like, give it to me. As much as I would love to watch these properly remastered and finally get rid of that green tint that was not in the theatrical versions, I want my appendices.
Exactly. But yeah, absolutely. Incredibles deserves to be on your shelf, and
20 years later still holds up. Probably hits even better now.
Yeah, especially I feel like it's not exactly commenting on the superhero genre, but it kind of shows you the better way, you know, like it's like being like, hey, the superhero genre is just a genre. Let's mix it up, you know, like let's combine some spy stuff with
and
it.
Also, to be fair,
you know, crime. Let's do some other things.
And also, to be fair, I do hear arguments all the time about how the MCU's oversaturated the market, so superhero movies don't feel special anymore.
To be fair, I don't think. I mean, Marvel has done it, but I will give the credit where the credit is due. Sony can suck it, and they've oversaturated the market, you know, like with their crap that they're putting out. You know, like sure they made Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse. Yes, some of the greatest animated movies ever made. Everything else can stop. You know, like you're just like, I don't need Madam Web. I never needed. Well, I may have needed a Morbius movie, but not that fucking Morbius movie. You know, like, and I'm alone in that sentiment. I like Morbius, but that's because he's weird.
Yeah, I like Morbius too. Didn't really need necessarily. Just make these fucking villains in a Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, but of course Sony can't, and then they can't. They will lose the Spider-Man contract if they don't make something with Spider-Man characters in it within a year. So it's like
so we keep getting these Spider-Man movies with no Spider-Man in them.
Yep, and now we are heading towards Kraven now, which I've heard people are excited for that, but Jesus Christ, how are you going to do Kraven without Spider-Man? Literally the only thing about Kraven is that he kills Spider-Man. That's it. It's like doing an Astral movie. You would be like, what? The only thing about him is that he beats the shit out of about Batman.
Well, Frank,
like,
we made 2 Venom movies that have no Spider-Man in them, even though the whole thing is that Venom is the evil doppelganger character for Spider-Man. So
yes, but at least it's Venom. You know, Venom has such popularity. You know, like he takes off.
And solo stuff after we do the Spider-Man stuff.
Yes, I
not
agree.
Separate from the Spider-Man stuff. And not divorced from the Spider-Man thing, which is his whole thing. Even his design is just evil Spider-Man. What the fuck?
I have heard, though, that they are interested in the next Spider-Man film either doing Hobgoblin or their own version of Venom in the MCU universe.
I figured that would, like, we left a little bit of the goo in that post-credit scene.
Yeah, so I feel like that could be the next move, you know, to take it back from Sony, being like, no, that's Spider-Man. You know, like Venom is Spider-Man. We can use that. You know, like don't think you have the rights to just Venom. You know, like, but we'll see. You know, like I have no hope for that next Spider-Man movie, but we'll see. And I liked Far From Home. Yeah, I liked
way off topic. Anyway, Incredibles. Way off topic. If you haven't seen it in a while, it's definitely worth watching again.
Yeah, absolutely. Go watch it again. And thank you guys for watching this episode, listening to this episode. You can watch us on YouTube or listen on any podcast platform you like. Seriously, go check. We're on every podcast platform. But if you want to see all of that together in every episode in a one place you can go, check out galaxyofgeek.com. And be sure to hit the buttons down below, make the algorithm do its thing, so we can
feed the beast,
do this because we really enjoy doing this. I do. I feel like it's one of those things that the people in our lives like that we do this, so we don't randomly go on for 2 hours at them about Incredibles.
We get the energy out here, so we don't talk their ears off.
Because we would, you know, like you're like, don't get me started on Back to the Future is what I tell most people, you know, just don't get me started, you know, like, or Star Wars. Yeah, like, oh God, even at my wedding, I remember me and Deshaun were up and I was yelling about Star Wars. I was pretty drunk on my wedding night. And
you were drunk. I was like in the middle of trying to fall asleep, and you just kind of like softly punched my leg, just like Deshaun, Last Jedi. Someone's talking shit about Last Jedi. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, Frank, all right, we'll talk about it. All right.
But it shows that it's the film goes deep in us, and I feel like, you know, that we're happy to do this podcast to get that energy out there.
Yeah.
So if you like that energy, though, you can check our personal social medias. I'm Yep Frank or Yep Gundam everywhere if you want to check out these little plastic boys.
Yep, I am Mod Karika pretty much everywhere. I've mentioned the media thread before. I'm almost up to the 80s. Spell your username for people so that way people can have it. Yeah. MODKURAIKA. We also usually include it in the episode description.
Yes, of course. Just wanted to make sure, because I know that some people might be misspelling it when they go to look you up, and let's make sure that they get it right.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as "yep" in front of a Frank, you know, like, but it is simple enough, and they should be able to find it pretty easy.
And maybe they think it's YEP, it's yep instead of yep Frank.
I've heard that. When you go to places and they're like, "What's your email?" and I'm like, "Yep, Frank," and they're like, "Why EP?" and I'm like, "Yip, Frank?" Like I'm like, no, hold on. Like you're like, no. It's Yip, Frank. But guys, thank you so much for the support, and we'll see you soon with more episodes.
Yeah, probably Dune Part 2 because that's coming out this week.
That is true. I'm very excited.
I'm going to see it on Wednesday, so
yeah. So I will also be seeing it, and what? So there we go. We got a solid plan for next episode. It's Dune Part 2. But thank you guys, and have a great week.
See you next time.